Hello, this is an explanation showing how our Mac OS Finder component is working. If you have already looked in the files, then the component is pretty much implemented in approximately 70 lines. And it allows you to select the files in here and browse through the folders. What I'm going to do in this video is pretty much explaining how the whole thing is built, as well as looking a little bit under the hood. So starting with this multi-table file, so notice that there's additionally included here called database. And inside this database, this is a very basic connectivity stuff. So we'll either connect to the local host using root or include the oh, sorry, it's not here. It's a separate commit, but essentially we are connecting, we're establishing connection to a database, adding this in this variable. And then we also create a couple of templates. For example, the database that we currently have has countries. So there's a model for countries, even though it's not used in the demo with the Finder, we still define it. The second one is actually the file, and you'll notice that it's actually recursive. So you have things like parent folder ID and a subfolder which reference the same class, and it allows us to traverse and go through the hierarchy of the files. This function is pretty interesting. So going back in here, you'll notice there is a button, right? The button called re-import from file system. And top attached means that the button will actually attach to, see, it looks like it is attached to the border on below. When I click that, it will show us a JavaScript model dialog with a header saying now important, and this dialog will attempt to load the virtual page, which is defined over here. On this virtual page, we are setting up a callback, and I would be using the M model. So it's the same model from over here. And I will start by deleting all the existing records inside the database. And then I'll call the import from file system and passing the root folder of the ATK. So I'm going to click this now. You'll see it's actually importing right now. And the import is complete. It will refresh the page, and you see I can now browse through the sources. Okay, let's continue looking. So when the successful import is complete, I'm adding the button. It's a big green fluid button, which for some reason is not expanding as I wanted. I'm not sure why fluid is not working. And if I click that, it will take me basically back to the multi-table PHP file. So essentially just refresh the page. The other thing I'm doing over here is I want to remove the header which says now importing from the dialog, because when the button appears, it's no longer important. It's no longer importing, so I don't want the user to see that. Below the button, I'm adding a component Finder. So that's the component I just have created. And in order to make it glued with the button, I'm also adding a class bottom attached. So again, it's a CSS class, just makes it appear as they connected together. Okay, and all I have to do is set the model M, and also because this is a universal component, it will work with any model. And as an example, let me do this country. Let's see if it works with countries. I haven't tried it. Yeah, it does. So it shows in the countries. Unfortunately, I won't be able to traverse into the countries simply because it doesn't have any relations, and it uses a relation over here. Okay, so back to this. It did import the files and it's showing to me It only shows the name because obviously there are not a lot of space over here. So as I drill into it, not much space. That's why it only shows the name. Going back to the process, how it imports the files. Let's examine this. So import from file system is being called. It passes the path. So path comes over here. It will open this folder and start iterating. We skip everything starting with dot for obvious reasons. There's a lot of elements, a lot of files inside the Git, which are not very fun. And we also don't want to go into the vendor because there are lots of files in there as well. So we're going to skip those two. And as we iterate, this is a very basic process, but essentially we are calling save, which creates a new record inside the file with a specified name, whether or not it's a folder, and the type. So notice that the boolean over here will be converted into the proper database type automatically, because we have type boolean in here. And type essentially takes the extension from the file name. Now, the next bit is quite interesting. So if the current file is a folder, we're going to do a reference to the subfolder of the currently loaded file, and then call import from file system again. So this will actually create a new model for us. And calling that, you'll notice that when we're traversing into the subfolder, it creates a condition. So any files imported through the same process recursively will be automatically linked. So if I go back to my files over here, you'll see that this is an initial batch for the input file. Actually, I can sort by IDs. Okay, so it started by importing build, but then I noticed it's a folder. So it went inside and imported ATK4, assigning parent folder ID correctly. And it did the same thing recursively for the whole tree. That, just like that. Okay. So that's our a component. Let's now look what's inside. So obviously, since it's a component defined using all the rules of Agile Toolkit, I can literally create a couple of these. So I can create another one. Let me remove this one. Let's put it above the button. And as before, I'm gonna use a new country, DB. Again, I haven't tried that. Oops. But we should have. Okay, the segment essentially creates the border around it. Okay, that's fine. So essentially it creates the countries first, and as I scroll down, there will be another one for the file system, but you'll see that they actually work independently. So if I click something over here, works, and they don't disrupt each other, which is the main rule of Agile UI and Agile Toolkit, that the components added will not break each other. Okay, so refresh doesn't work for some reason. All right, so header, right? So you'll notice that when I'm adding the header here, I'm specifying subheader, which appears like this. Neat feature of a header component. And now next, let's look inside this code over here. So to begin, I am extending Finder from the column. So columns is a component which is essentially a grid. So as I select more elements, you'll see that it actually splits them vertically, which is what grids do. So these are the columns, and inside here I will be using add column method to wrap all the tables. So I'm adding a new column, and inside this column I will be adding a table. This is a very basic table. It's not a grid, it's a table. And then in here, if there are any selections made by the user, it will add additional columns, and within these columns it will add additional tables. Maybe this can be done more optimally. I don't know. some code reuse. I just literally coded up. Okay, so first of all, we're adding a class called internal celled, which means that we're going to have these separators over here between the columns. And there would be no gaps on the left. Yeah, so it's that one. Then we're adding a table. I'm specifying that I don't want the header on the table. If I do have header, it will include the name over here, which I don't really want because it's confusing. And I'm also saying very basic selectable. So if I remove that, you'll see the table has a border around it, which is not something I want. Double borders. That's why I'm making it very basic. Selectable means that when I move the mouse over, it highlights the element. And it obviously doesn't highlight in here. Okay. Finally, I want to say that the cursor, when I'm moving over this table, will become a pointer. Okay. There is slight problem. So when I'm clicking into the file and file doesn't have anything underneath, it still shows no records. Still, I can click on that, which generates the code. But I thought, what the hell? I'm not going to look into that for now. All right, so building an original table is easy. We're just adding the model, which has been passed to us. As for the columns, I want to add just one column, which is the title. Well, normally it's name, but it theoretically can be something else. Selections would be passed to myself when I'm refreshing. So when I'm let me fire up inspector over here. I look at the resources. So when I click build, essentially this gets reloaded, and you'll notice there's this thing coming over here. Okay, so as I click on them, it adds my selections. So this is essentially a selection in the first column and the second and the third. If I click on something else here, the selection will restart from the beginning. So that's the selection. And it uses the name of the component as a parameter for the get, which means if I have multiple components, they will not clash to each other. So they are pretty independent. And obviously, if I don't have anything, I will use empty one. Now, if anything is selected, so if I clicked on the demo over here, then it needs to be highlighted. And the way I'm doing that is by adding a GS chain, which will be executed on load or on refresh. And I'm saying find the row with a specific data ID and add the class active, which is a class of semantic UI. It will highlight the current element in the table. Okay, that's cool. Next, essentially, this is where this root comes in. So the way how root works, the model is traversable. So sometimes you'd have a model which has related entity, and then that entity can have another related entity. And in here, I can specify multiple. So for example, if my initial model would be a client, so I will just set model new client. And let's say that each client has some orders. So it would be like orders. And then for each order, I have multiple lines. So I'll go lines, right? So that would be my path. This would be an order in which the models will be traversed. In my case with files, there's only one model which refers itself. So we call it subfolder. The way how it will work, it will take one of these at a time from the root. But if the root is empty, it will add the last one back. Okay, so essentially it loops around the last element inside this array because we need to traverse into something. That's the only reasonable way to implement infinite recursion. Okay, so back to here. So path is indicating our current path so far. So we will need that to construct the selections URL. So that's a bit complicated. I'm going to skip that for now and look inside here. So while we have still something in the selections array, which list all the IDs. So in my example right now, over here, I have 3 elements in a selections array. So it will loop 3 times. This is the initial table, and these are 2 additional tables over here. So as we go through them, we'll pick one from the selections. We will shift the array, so we have kind of the remaining IDs over here, and we'll put the ID inside the path. So taking ID from the selections, putting it inside another one. Now, in regards to the model, remember we were passed a model, which is a file initially. We'll have to load the ID which the user have selected, and then if it doesn't have the specified ref, this is where we'll break and not going any further. But if there is a ref, then we'll jump into that and reassign the model. So on the next iteration, the model will be new. And if it's the example with client, orders, and lines, then the model would be initially client, and then as we're traversing to would be orders, lines, and so on. In here, we're just adding another table. It's pretty much the same as above, and we're setting the model for this table. So we want to display that exactly the same thing. Here, we're also highlighting, again, exactly the same way how I did up here. And now this code. So this code, again, repeats. It's exactly the same code. There's a lot of, no, there's not a lot, but some code duplication can be probably optimized. But let's look how this works. I'm going to start from the bottom and roll up. So table, we are assigning a click event on the row of the table. So if actually something, I think we need to look at this, but I won't bother because it's very simple table, doesn't have anything other than rows. Anyway, so if the row is clicked, we are going to execute this action GS reload. And the GS action can be passed a view which will reload, right? So we will reload, and in order for the action to know which view, we need to pass. And every time we're passing this, which refers to our finder component, so the current finder component, it will always refresh itself. Probably something can be done neater, but that's the simplest way. So I don't see why not. Finally, we need to pass the selection, and this is why this is necessary right now. So I thought maybe we could do something like this, and then specifying path like that, but it's not possible right now. So GS reload doesn't handle this correctly. So I have added like a override for the URL. So normally the URL would be equal to just this, okay? And the way how GS load works, it creates a callback, which it is then uses to refresh the component. And when this callback is triggered, it will render the same component once again and send back the HTML. In our case, we want to add something extra. So we're using this template. This would be the URL for the reload. And because it's a callback, it will have a question mark. Okay, let me actually inspect this one over here. Okay, so when I'm clicking this, that part until the callback, this is produced by the get URL method. And after that, we need to add and sign followed by the name of this of this component, which would be ADK admin finder, equals, and here we would specify the parameters. Now the parameters are tricky because when I'm clicking on somewhere on this table, I have to embed some elements from the path, which is this element, but additionally I have to embed the ID of this record. So that's why it's so complicated. And in here, this is exactly what we're doing. So this part, these square brackets, this will refer to the path in which we find ourselves so far. And this would be like, you know, the number of IDs in a path followed by a comma. Yeah, followed by comma. And if there's no path, because the code is identical here and here, so if there's no path, then it will be just empty. It will be nothing. And then we concatenate that with an expression which uses the jQuery to get the ID of a currently clicked row. Okay, and so when this is passed inside the actual URL, so when it gets passed into the reload, then it properly figures out what it needs to pass into the reload action. It's a bit complicated, but it works. It probably can be done simpler. I don't know how, but it probably can be. So this is a walkthrough explaining how this thing works, and I hope you find that interesting. Thank you.